If you know that you struggle with setting boundaries, then this talk today is for you. If you think you might struggle with setting boundaries, then this talk today is for you. Because if you're starting to ask questions about boundaries and starting to wonder if you have some issues with boundaries in your life, then chances are you do, or you wouldn't be asking those questions. So this video, this talk today is for you, and it's going to clear a lot of things up for you. We're just going to do some foundational work with boundaries. I do talk a lot about boundaries, mostly, well, for two reasons. One of them is because of me seeing myself and my life before understanding what a boundary was, and then after doing my own work to really establish and create and maintain strong and healthy boundaries. And then also seeing my clients and students when their world is opened up to boundaries, seeing their lives and their well-being and their relationships with both others and themselves completely transform. So that's why I drink the boundaries Kool-Aid. That's why I'm offering it up for anyone else who wants some of it. But we are going to do some foundational work today. For those of you who are more seasoned in your boundaries, you've been doing boundaries work for a while, this is going to be a great refresher. For those of you brand new, this is going to be key foundational work to get you going to be able to establish, maintain, and feel good about healthy boundaries in your life. If you're new here, welcome to our incredible little corner on the internet. Take a second, introduce yourself in the comment section below. If you're back again, it's always good to have you. Either way, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. The button's about right down there. Either way, my name is Kristina, and I am a registered clinical therapist, a researcher, a coach, and the creator of my incredible membership community called the Shift Society, full of shifters taking this work that we talk about here to a deeper level and being supported and encouraged and just being surrounded with a community the whole way through as we are doing this work. You can get more information about the Shift Society in the description below. I help heart-centered humans break through the crap that is holding them back so that they can like themselves and their lives more every day. And not having clear and healthy boundaries in your life can really hold you back. If you often struggle with feeling overly stressed and overwhelmed and stuck and trapped and resentful and taken advantage of, and if you don't really know who you are and don't feel solid and secure in who you are, and notice yourself fusing your identity into other people, then chances are there is a boundary issue that you've never learned how to understand, how to create, and how to set and keep your own clear and healthy boundaries. And so we are going to start changing that today by giving you the foundational steps to having boundaries, having better boundaries, more clear and healthy boundaries in your life. Before we get into this, I just want to remind you, in case you're new to the boundary stuff, I have talked about this before on my channel, but if you're new to it, just to note that contrary to a lot of the teaching out there, boundaries are not about forcing anybody else to change. They are not about controlling anyone else. They're not about saying, you need to be this way in order for me to be okay. What they are is what happens after we make a request for change. So we find that someone is acting in a way or saying things or doing things that we don't like. And so we are requesting a change for them, of them. And then if they decide not to change, then it's up to us to decide what we need to do to take care of ourselves. So the analogy of understanding boundaries as here's your yard, here's your lovely little house on a tree-lined street, and you've got this kind of front yard area with a white picket fence surrounding it, and people are welcome to come into your yard, right? It's not like a stone wall that says keep out, nobody enter. People are allowed to come in, but you do have some rules with how you would like them to treat your property and treat your belongings if they're in there. So if they take your hose and use their hose, you would like them to wind it up and put it away when they're done. If their dog comes in and craps on your lawn, you would like them to pick up the poop and take it away with them. So these are going to be your rules for your property, and no one gets to tell you sort of what boundaries you should have or shouldn't have, and what are the right boundaries and what are the wrong boundaries. It's going to depend on the person. Someone might be totally fine with the neighbor coming and using their hose and then just leaving it all askew all over the yard. Somebody might be totally fine with that and be like, oh, they were probably busy. It's no big deal. I'm more than happy to wind it up. And it's not going to be an issue for you. The important thing is that you decide what your rules are. And so it's not saying to the other person, you have to do this. If you don't do this, then I'm going to kick and I'm going to scream and I'm going to yell. No, I'm going to say, if you would like to use my hose, this is how I'd like you to treat it. I'd like you to wind it up. And if you are not willing to do that, then that's fine. I mean, you can do whatever you want. Like, you can have whatever ideas about how to treat someone else's hose that you want to. You just won't be given permission to use my hose, right? So these are the rules. If you want to come into my space, if you want to use my stuff, then this is what I ask. And if you don't want to do that, then my stuff is not available for you. And if you really come in and make a mess of things and don't respect any of the rules, then I'm going to ask you not to come onto my property. You can go and exist however you want to exist. I'm not trying to control you, but you can just exist in someone else's space or in your own space like that, but not in my space. Capiche? So that's it. That's what generally, when we're talking about boundaries, that's just sort of an overview of what it looks like. What's okay with me, what's not okay with me. You can do whatever you want, but if you want to be in my space, this is what it looks like. So getting clear on that. So many people run into problems with boundaries when they think that they are using a boundary to change someone else. And you know how well that works because you've tried it. And generally, other people don't really want to be told what they have to do or not have to do, right? Just like us, we don't like to be told what we have to do or not have to do. And so when that happens, when we start to feel controlled, we end up resisting, we end up getting annoyed, we end up maybe even rebelling and doing more of the thing. Again, that does depend on the relationship and on the person. If someone is coming to you and saying, you have to do this or else, versus like, hey, when you do this, it really bothers me, I don't like it, I'm going to ask you to stop doing it, or could you be more mindful of this, or make an effort to not do it when I'm around, or whatever that is. So you can make a request, and hopefully there is a certain level of reciprocity and respect in those close relationships where people will be willing to respect that request. But the boundary comes in if they are not willing to do that. So if you need to continue doing this thing, if you need to continue to yell at me or criticize my life choices or stop by with unannounced, then this is what I will do. This is what I need to do to manage myself in this situation. So, an example, if you yell at me, you can yell. I'm not going to try and control you, but if you yell at me, I will walk out of the room. And if you follow me to the other room, I will leave the house and go on a walk until you are, willing to have a civil conversation in a moderate tone or whatever that is. So you can keep yelling. I'm just not available to stick around for it. Another example, if it's a family member or a friend or whoever who, when you are with them, they like to comment on your weight, your life choices, your relationship status, that's their prerogative. They might think those are perfectly reasonable things to talk about. You may not. You may not want to. You may not like that. And so that's okay, right? They might think it's okay. You don't think it's okay. But if they want to play in your yard, they have to follow your rules. But they don't have to follow your rules. It just means that then they can't play in your yard. So if someone brings up topics that you are not interested in talking about, then you simply don't engage in the conversation. And you can let them know, you can say, hey, I'm not interested in talking about my weight, my life choices, or my relationship status, or whatever the topic is. If you would like to talk about that, I am not going to engage in the conversation. I'm not going to answer questions about it. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just not going to do it. Your choice, my choice. Your choice to bring up the topic, my choice to not participate in the conversation. If you have children, and if you're around someone, a family member or whoever, when they are with your children, they call your children down, they criticize your children, they, treat your children in a way that is not okay with you, then those are your children. It is your prerogative to say, hey, whatever you think is an okay way to talk to a child, I don't agree. So if you are going to continue to talk to them like that, I will not bring my children around you. That's it. Simple as that. And then another example that comes up surprisingly frequently with both my clients, and it's come up a few times in the Shift Society as well, is having people that stop by your house unannounced. Some of you really do not like this and you don't know what to do about it. Some of you are completely fine with it and you're like, that's great. You might even really like having people stop by, pop in for a cup of coffee and a little chat or whatever that is. But some of you do not like it and you don't know what to do about it, especially if it's like a close family member, like a mother or a mother-in-law who maybe even has great intentions of stopping by to bring you something or to just drop something off or just wants to come for a visit to maybe see the kids or whatever that is. There's great intentions, but you don't like it. So you feel really stuck because you don't want to hurt their feelings. You don't want to upset them, but you also really don't like it. So again, being able to make the request and being able to say, hey, I don't love it when people stop by. I really love seeing you and I want to spend time with you, but could you please call first? Could we set up a time? Because I find it really kind of jarring and challenging for me. It's a me issue. I, find it hard to do things that are not planned and to have people come over without anticipating it or planning or preparing for it. So just being able to say that. And if this person doesn't like that boundary, continues to do it, even though you've requested them not to do it, then just being able to say, hey, I've asked you a few times to not do this. So what's going to happen is if you do stop by unannounced, I'm not going to answer the door. If you would like to call first, set up a time, make a plan, absolutely. But I won't answer the door. So you can stop by, you can, continue to do what you're doing. This is about me controlling your behavior because I can't, obviously. But this is what I will do if you continue to do this. So giving you more clarity about what a boundary is. It's about saying, if you do this, then I will do this. Your choice, my choice. So now when it comes to setting and establishing and keeping our boundaries, I'm going to give you 3 steps for that. And the first one is to get really clear on your boundaries. And the reason this is important, because if you want to really set your boundaries and keep your boundaries, you have to like your reasons for your boundaries. It's going to make it a lot easier. I mean, you can just sort of make up a boundary on the whim and set it. But if there is any pushback, if you're not feeling sort of solid and secure and you haven't really spent the time really coming up with your reasons why you like the boundary, why you are okay with setting the boundary, why you believe that this is the right boundary for you, then if there's pushback, you're more likely to kind of be sort of wishy-washy about it and be like, okay, I guess I shouldn't set this boundary. And I guess if you don't like it, then I shouldn't be doing it, right? And then we're going to more likely to kind of cave and not keep the boundary. That's okay if you really are okay with changing your boundary, but it's not okay if you're getting talked into something that you really don't want to and then end up feeling resentful or bitter or angry or even more stressed or more overwhelmed, right? If you have said no and someone convinces you to say yes and you don't actually want to say yes, but you don't really have a reason that you believe to be a good enough reason to stick with your no, then you're going to be more likely to cave and go to the yes, even though it's not a genuine yes. Yes? Okay. So spending the time to come up with your reasons for your boundary and like your reasons. Feel solid in those reasons. It's going to make it so much easier to set the boundary and keep the boundary. And then at an even deeper level, you not only have to just like your boundary, you have to believe that you are worthy of having boundaries. That you're allowed to have a space with your own rules, even if other people don't agree with them or like them or want to follow them. Because I'm going to tell you right now, there is going to be pushback, especially if you've been doing things a certain way for people for a long time, and all of a sudden you start changing it, you're messing with the system. They are going to feel that change. It's going to disrupt something in them. They're not going to like it, and so they are likely going to push back on the boundary. And if you don't believe that you're actually worthy of having and keeping boundaries, that your well-being, that your sanity, that your sense of self, that your limits is worth respecting, worth you respecting. They don't have to believe it's worth respecting. That's up to them. You can't control their thoughts. But what you can do is manage your own and get clear on your own. So you have to get clear on your reasons and have to believe that you deserve to have those reasons. This goes deep. This is why boundary setting is so much more about learning how to say no. It's about believing that it's okay for you to say no. Anyone can say no, but you're not doing it because there's something inside of you, there's a belief inside of you that it's not okay, that you're not worthy of it, that someone else's preference about how you spend your time and energy is more important than your own preference about how you spend your time and energy. So getting that clarity. So then the next step, step 2, is to actually implement the boundary. Now, there are 2 ways that you can do this. You can overtly say the boundary. If you do this, I will do this. Please stop doing this. And if you continue, then I will do this, or whatever that is. You can very overtly, clearly spell it out. You can also clearly communicate a boundary non-verbally. So let's say there's someone in your life who likes to have really heated, intense, kind of provocative conversations about sort of controversial topics. And you know that engaging with this person in conversations like this doesn't usually go anywhere good. It's not helpful. It's not useful. It's not how you want to use your energy. It's just not what you want to do. And so if the person starts kind of trying to draw you into the conversation, you can simply not. You can change the subject. You can, give really what I call is the limp handshake response. When you give someone a handshake and they give you kind of like a limp hand, you're like, ugh, that felt kind of icky. Like they're not really giving you anything. And so you kind of pull away. Same thing in a conversation. If someone is like, oh, can you believe that this happened with this government or whatever that is? And they're like, that's just wild. Who does stuff like that? And you're like, I don't know. That's interesting. And just giving them the limp handshake. Like you're not really giving them anything. And it's just communicating that you're not willing to engage, keeping your responses sort of very short and on the surface, and just not drawing into that. That is going to communicate pretty clearly to the person that you are not interested in having the conversation. Now, they might try a few times to draw you in. They might be like, oh, well, maybe that didn't work. Maybe I'll try something else. And they might try to draw you in another way, and just you kind of continuing to not let yourself be drawn into it if that's not a conversation you want to be drawn into. You can state things more directly. You can say to someone, hey, in this conversation, you are getting aggressive and you are being critical, and I don't like the way that you are talking. And so I am going to leave the conversation, and I will come back if and when you are willing to engage me in a respectful way. And if you are not willing to do that, that's completely your choice. I'm just not willing to engage in a conversation. So you can say it more directly like that, or you can communicate it in a direct but non-verbal way. And you may need to play with that a little bit. And some people will pick up on the nonverbal stuff and some people may not. And so then you may need to, if someone keeps trying, you may have to say with the conversation example, hey, I'm not willing to discuss this topic, but I am willing to discuss this topic. So you might say, I'm not willing to talk about politics, but I am willing to talk about sports. Or I am willing to talk about how your job is going and what's going on in your life. So that's clearly spelling it out if the person is not getting the nonverbal cues. Then, and this is probably the most important, actually they're all important, but this is where people get tripped up the most. The third step with boundaries, and it's so simple, but it seems to be the biggest problem for people, is actually keeping the boundary. So often it happens that you muster up the courage to state your boundary, and you finally say it, you finally choke out the words, and you're so proud of yourself for doing it. But then the person gives some resistance. Well, I don't like that. Well, that's kind of dumb. Well, you should do this anyways. And then you crumble like a house of cards. Is that the right analogy? The house of cards crumble? You know what I mean. But you fold. Oh yeah, you fold like a house of cards. Is that it? Anyways. But you just give in. And that's normal, and know that that's normal because it can be really scary. It can feel really weird and foreign to start setting boundaries when you haven't before, but working to keep solid in that. And this is why you have to like your reasons for it, and you have to believe that you deserve to have those reasons for your boundaries, because that's going to help you resist the folding. Because what happens when we say no and there's pushback and then we change that to a yes, it just communicates the message to somebody else that all they need to do is push back, and then you will give them what they want or do what they want or change your no to a yes. And you don't really mean it. What is actually communicating is you don't really mean it. And then they don't actually believe you. Your boundaries are not believable because you're not keeping them. And this just goes back to basic behavioral psychology. So if you give a reward, and then you stop giving the reward and continue to stop giving the reward, right? You continue I can't remember what animal they use. It was like the mouse or whatever, pushes the lever. And every time they push the lever, the little pellet comes out. And then all of a sudden they start pushing the lever and the pellet doesn't come out. They're going to keep pushing it for a while. And if no pellet comes out after them pushing it for a little while, they're just going to stop pushing it, right? Because they're like, this isn't available. No matter how many times I push, it's not coming. So I'm going to save my energy and focus it somewhere else. I'm going to stop doing this behavior because it's not getting me what I want. However, what they found is the most effective way to prevent a behavior from changing is something called intermittent reinforcement. So if every time the mouse pushes the little lever and the little treat comes out, and then all of a sudden it stops, and then they push a few more times, and then a treat comes out, then they're going to keep pushing, and they will actually push for a very long time because they believe that the treat will eventually come out. They just have to keep pushing. If the treat comes out after a few times of it not coming out, that is a very solid way of reinforcing a behavior that you actually want to change. So if you say no, and even if you say no a couple times, and then all of a sudden someone keeps pushing and you end up changing and saying yes, it doesn't sink in that like, oh, I pushed this person to say yes, so I should probably not do that. What they think is, oh, I pushed this person to say yes and it worked, so next time I just have to keep pushing to get them to say yes, to get them to just chuck their boundary out the window. And so it's going to make it even harder on you to stick with the boundary, to get the person to respect your boundary if you are not consistent with the boundary. You might think that like, oh, maybe I shouldn't keep this boundary. Maybe I should just give in. And then you do. And you might think that you're doing a good thing, or you're being a good person or a nice person or whatever that is. But if you have already established that you want this boundary, that you like your reasons for this boundary, you believe it's okay for you to have this boundary, then you've already done that work. You don't need to give in. You don't need to change it because you've already done the work to establish that reason for that boundary. And so let yourself stick with it, or else you are making things more confusing for the other person. You're making things more difficult for yourself. And it is going to make it so it's going to be even harder to have them respect the boundary because they haven't been respecting the boundary because you haven't been respecting the boundary. See how that works? So this is why it is really important to stick with your boundaries and why it's so important to like your reasons for your boundaries. So if boundaries is something that you really struggle with and you don't know where to start, then I have a free download for you. It's called 25 Ways to Say No. If you're the kind of person that really struggles to say no, and especially don't like the sort of hard and fast, like, no, absolutely not, I cannot, I will not, and that's not really your style, and you want gentler ways to say no, but that are also really clear, then that list of 25 ways to say no is going to be great for you. You can go through and you can look at the different ones. There's 25 word for word scripts, and you can decide which ones kind of fit for you and then try them out and start kind of working that healthy boundaries muscle by letting yourself start to say no to things in a way that kind of, in language that feels more comfortable for you. You're going to want to make sure you get that. If you're ready to do the deeper boundary work, I have an in-depth course for you called Healthy Boundaries Bootcamp. This one goes in and it gives you the step-by-step process to clearing out your boundary resistance, getting into your mindset and clearing the way for you to feel good about having boundaries. Because like I said, the biggest reason why you're not setting and keeping your boundaries is because there's some mind trash in there that's telling you why you don't deserve it, why people won't love you if you do, why your value only comes from your yes, and all of these other things. There's so many things in there. There's a lot of fear in there around setting boundaries. There's a lot of insecurity around there. There's a lot of codependence and emotional enmeshment with others that is stopping you from setting boundaries. And this course goes into undoing that and clearing the way so that you can step clearly and confidently into your boundaries and feel good about it. And then it also gives you scripts, step-by-step processes for setting boundaries in all kinds of different situations, even with really tricky people in your life. That course is going to be for you. You can get more information about that in the description below. So, you've got some work to do. You've got some resources to dig into. Would love to hear in the comment section below what connected with you from this talk. What's your first step that you're going to take? And how it's going with your boundaries. Always good to be with you. Get the 25 ways to say no. Check out Healthy Boundaries Bootcamp. More information about that below as well. And until next time, take good care.